All right, we're going to get started with Photoshop. Very exciting. And when you first jump into this product, it's a great idea to get comfortable with the interface, to familiar yourself with some of the vocabulary and also the workspace. So let's get started. We're going to jump in by launching Photoshop, and you might have an icon on your desktop or on the taskbar depending on how your system is set up. But here it's opening up, and it actually launches pretty quickly because of the new Mercury engine, and that speeds up not just the launch but a lot of the other processes. And CS6 interface is a little bit different than the previous ones. One of the things you might notice right away is the color is different, and actually that's related to a preference. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Edit menu, down to Preferences, scroll down all the way over here. Preferences, I'm going to go here to Interface, and I can see that the color theme is a dark gray, and that's the new default. You could actually make it back to the original colors if you were using previous versions of Photoshop, and you can even go all the way to a dark color. Let's go and keep it here at this dark gray. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Actually, you can use the keyboard shortcut to change that. If you use the Shift and the F1 key, it'll go darker, or the Shift and the F2 keys, it goes a little bit lighter. So again, the F1 makes it darker, the F2 makes it lighter with the Shift. And if you're using a Mac, you're going to use the Shift and the function as well as the F1 and F2. Well, at the very top, we have a title bar, and the title bar has the menu bar. In fact, one thing that's a little bit different, in the previous versions we had what was called an application bar, and that no longer is here. They've streamlined it so you get more real estate, if you will, some bigger room in here. But we got this title bar. The title bar has actually been reduced in size a little bit, so it's about 30% less or smaller. And on there we've got our menus like File and Edit, as you saw. And then right below that, we have what's called the options bar, and that gives you more options depending on what tool you have selected. So right now we have a selection tool. And then if we go all the way over to the far right hand side, we have the workspace switcher. The default workspace is called Essentials, and there's actually some different workspaces that come with Photoshop CS6. So here's one called New in CS6. And it's going to show you some of the fine items that are new or at least improved in this version. And an interesting thing here too is when you go to the menus, you can even see in blue some of the menus items that have been new or improved. And the fact that they're a little bit lighter blue is simply because we don't have a file open. So there's certain things that you can only do when you have a file open or a particular type of file open. So you can see different options here. I'm going to go back and change it. Another workspace that you can use is called Painting, and this is going to be great if you're doing some painting of your documents, digital painting, or even touch-ups. And we can go in here to Photography. This is going to give you a lot more options for working with photographs and making touch-ups to your digital photographs. For example, you can work on adjustment layers, or the histogram lets you track your colors. And we'll try one more here, Typography. And this will be helpful if you're working with text. So you want to put text in your photographs. So let's go back to the default, which is Essentials. And we'll reset it in here. And one of the things that you probably noticed was changing most of the time when you were switching your workspace was the actual panels. And these panels, some you might call them toolbars or panes, but they're panels here, are giving you lots of tools for working on your documents. And there's some things that you can do to customize your panels. So first of all, you can collapse and expand them, and there is a chevron here. In fact, if I hover, I can even see it says collapse to icons, and I can click on this and it can either expand it or collapse it. And when I collapse it, I'm seeing right now an icon and a label, and that's handy when I'm still learning what those items are, but actually I like resizing it here. And when I resize it, I just see the icon. It's going to give you more real estate, and that's always helpful as you're working in your images. And when I hover my mouse over the icon, it does remind me what that panel is called. And so it's actually, you're going to learn them just by using them. I would encourage you to just keep it at that small icon rather than the icon and the label. And you can always expand the entire dock of panels. So there's a dock of panels. In fact, this actually has a second dock. If I click on this and I expand the second dock of panels, and you can even make a third dock if you wanted to, etc. Now, in addition to expanding the entire dock of panels, you can also click on a panel and it opens up just that panel, or actually it's the group of panels, but it's a temporary expansion. So if I were to click on another panel, it opens up a separate panel. And there's a grouping of here. You can see color and swatches are grouped together. And you can also see slightly by the grabber hand here that they're grouped together, and gives you an idea of how these are set up. Let's go ahead and expand the entire dock, and you can see how these are colors and swatches are grouped together, and adjustment and styles are grouped together. And as you start experimenting, you can definitely make some changes. So I'm going to leave this back with the essentials. And what's interesting too is if I were to make some changes in here, for example, I can always reset this workspace. So don't worry about exploring. Feel free to explore and know that you can always reset your workspace. It's whatever workspace you happen to be on. So if I'm on topography and I try to reset it, it'll reset the current workspace. Let's go back to essentials and I can reset it. So no worries for experimenting. Now, one of the things that you can also do with these panels besides expanding and collapsing is you can float them. So now my color panel is floating. And if I were to dock it, I'm dragging this panel, and as I drag it, I'm getting what's called a drop zone. You can see this blue line. And depending on where that blue line is showing up, that's telling me where I'm going to be dropping that panel in, where I'm docking the panel. So for example, right now I'm going to be docking it with swatches. I'll be grouping it with swatches. And I can even change the order of the tabs here. If I move it a little higher, it's actually going to make its own group. And I can pull it out. If I move it into the second dock right below, it's going to make us a new group in the second dock. Pull it out. You can see how it's collapsed here. Let's expand that. If I move into the second dock but add it, you can see it's going to be grouping it. And then one more thing, if I pull it out here, I can add it as a third dock. You can see how it adds it as a third dock. So all these different options, and sometimes we're doing this on purpose and sometimes we're doing it on accident. So it's a good idea to get comfortable with moving these panels around. And again, we can always reset the workspace back to our defaults so we don't have to worry about getting it right where we had it in the first place. So then I can come over here to my layers panel and see wonderful layers and channels, and sometimes we can even move these panels up and down depending on what's available. But I like the length of this. And I've got my history panel. Here's one where I can pull it down a little bit because this is not completely expanding the entire dock. It's just expanding that one panel. So I can pull it down if I have several steps of history. And then I've got another panel with my properties panel as well. So you can see some different options. And if I go to my window menu, I can even make some adjustments as I see fit. So for example, I might want to add in a panel called Actions. And I can see where that shows up. It's showing up with the history. And I might want to add a panel called Layer Comps. That's a handy one. I like working with that one. And as I'm making these changes, my essentials here is still available, but one of the nice things is under the workspace switcher, I can create a new workspace. And as you start working with Photoshop and becoming more comfortable with it, and as you start finding what panel do you like, you're going to want to change the workspace. So let's go ahead and create a new one. And I'm just going to call this My Workspace. And I'll put a 1 in there because you know what? I usually have more than one workspace as I'm working on it. The workspace can capture not just panel locations, but also keyboard shortcuts and menus. We didn't specify any keyboard shortcuts or menus, so I'm going to leave those unchecked. Let's go ahead and save that. Now I've got My Workspace. Now interesting, if I go to Essentials, Essentials is still the way we left it. So I'm going to go ahead and reset Essentials. But when I go back to My Workspace, this is going to be the starting point. So now if I make changes to this workspace, I can always reset it back to the defaults that I've defined. Now let's take a closer look at some of the menu preferences and the edit preferences. I'm going to go down here to below, and I can see one of the things we have options is for keyboard shortcuts and for menus. So let's take a look at menus. And with the menus, we can actually set up some different settings in here. Like here's the one called New in CS6, and here's the Photoshop defaults. And with the New in CS6, let's take a closer look here at our type menu. You can see where it says blue, blue, blue. This is how you could actually color code menu options. And so if there are certain settings that you really like, you could go in there and add a color if you wanted to, and even hide certain options that you didn't want to see to make it more valuable for you. I'm going to go back and reset this to Photoshop defaults. But you do have some options of creating your own menu commands. And that's something that could have been saved with your workspace. Let's go back here to edit. You also have edit keyboard shortcuts. And with keyboard shortcuts, you can set up the different keyboard shortcuts that you want to use for your document. But what I like is not necessarily changing the keyboard shortcuts, but the fact that I can see the keyboard shortcuts and even get a copy of them, create a web page that shows them. So I could even get a copy of that printed out if I wanted to and see all those items. And we did look at the preferences, and there's several preferences that you might want to explore as you're working in Photoshop. But as you're getting started, it's a good idea just to keep it simple and leave the default preferences. Now I'm going to do something here. I'm going to actually close Photoshop, and when you're making changes in Photoshop, one thing to be aware of is that if you hold down the Control and the Alt and the Shift key, and then you click on your icon, then you'll get an option to delete the Adobe Photoshop settings. So if you're making some changes in here, you can actually delete all those settings, all those presets. Let's go and choose yes. And you'll notice it goes back to Essentials. And any changes you might have done, like making changes to the colors, or if you had made changes to some of your recent files, all those get reset back to the standards. One thing though is, look, your workspace is still there. So that's one thing that didn't go away. And there's also some options when you're going into Edit. We'll go scroll down here to Preferences. Notice we have to scroll down again because we had reset all of our images. But when we go into Edit, Preferences, and Plugins, we can actually control some of the options about extensions and plugins and how we might have set something up from third-party process. So if we had, some settings from previous versions as well. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that out. All right, well now it's time for a pop quiz. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question. What is the name of the default workspace in Adobe Photoshop CS6? A, Essentials, B, New in CS6, C, Photography, D, Switcher. What do you think? The answer is A, Essentials. Well, now you've had a chance to explore Photoshop, and now it's your turn to jump right in and get started.